Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannah Zuberi, and I'm your host today for the Justice for All Now show. Thank you for joining us. Today we will be discussing Yemen. International health officials have long warned that Yemen's population could be extremely vulnerable to a COVID outbreak that would be difficult to detect in a country where health and infrastructure has been damaged by years of war. More than 3.5 million displaced people, returnees, refugees, and asylum seekers are now reliant on regular humanitarian aid to survive, according to the United Nations. Approximately 80% of Yemen's population, or 24 million people, rely on aid, and 10 million are facing famine, according to widely reported news on channels such as Al Jazeera, AP News, and Reuters. A massive prisoner exchange was first proposed during Stockholm talks in December 2018, and the Yemen government and the Houthis have agreed to the idea as a confidence-building step. These are some of the things that we will be discussing today with our guests. So, I'd like to introduce our guest today. Baraa Shiban is a good friend, and I'm so glad to have you on Justice for All Now, Baraa. Baraa sits on the board of Wikipedia. He's the first Yemeni to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and he is not the first Yemeni. Okay, so we need to get you can't hear me? Oh, he's not able to speak. Let's get up here. Oops. Assalamu alaikum, Baraa. Would you like to introduce yourself? We need to correct your bio on Wikipedia then.
Yes. Yeah, because the Wikipedia page is I don't know who changed it. Maybe a year ago or something.
Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah. Please go ahead and introduce yourself then.
From the horses. I'm Baraa Shiban. I was a member of the Yemeni National Dialogue, the convention that was tasked to draft Yemen's new constitution post the 2011 uprising. I was representing the youth delegation working on the transitional justice working group. And I work with the NGO Reprieve. Currently, I'm a Middle East and North Africa caseworker. I've done, and I still do, a lot of work concerning Yemen, from investigating drone strikes to human rights abuses across the country.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I know it's close to iftar time in London, so thank you so much for joining us at this for this. So, since we last met when you were here in the United States, especially for your drone work that you had been doing and the research that you had been doing, what has transpired in Yemen? Share with us, because a lot of our audience members possibly see fundraisers, they see pictures of starving children, and they might catch the off and on news, but it has not received the same sort of coverage that other crises have. It has definitely not been a central point for the Muslim community to come around. So please let us know what has transpired since 2015.
I think the main thing about Yemen is that it's in the news a lot, but it's the news with for me, with no substance or information. So basically, people have limited and very amount of information of what's happening and why there is a conflict in the first place. And in order to understand it, there's like the conflict has deep-rooted reasons why it happened, but I'm not going to go back into describing the whole history of Yemen. But if you need to understand Yemen, you at least need to start from 2011, the moment where there was change. The youth, women, and civil society were out in the street, and it was a moment of hope and optimism that the country would move forward if it was given a pathway, a political transition. Following the 2011 uprising, there was a 3 years of political transition that a national dialogue came across. And this is where the international community at least appeared to the public that it was heavily involved into driving Yemen at least through the transition until the coming elections. Now, we were able to draft a document for the constitution. The national dialogue did happen. But the critical and most important part in the transition, which is reaching into elections and having a referendum where you'd have the people, the public vote where it matters, this fell short. The coup happened against the central government first in 2014. There was a 6 months period where the international community again intervened, providing temporary solutions. But eventually, in March 2015, things fell apart again, and the country went into conflict. But this time it was a different dynamic, because the Houthi movement, which joined the revolution against the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh in 2011, led the coup against the central government in 2014. Although they were part of the dialogue, but they had the regional dynamic came into play, because the Houthis, many believed, were funded and supported by Iran. And as Yemen being the neighbor of Saudi Arabia was afraid of Iran having another foothold in the region. It decided to intervene, and at the beginning, that intervention got a lot of international backing. Now the situation has changed since 2015, because the coalition that came into place, which was tasked according to the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, to reinstate the official government, kind of fell apart into different paths. In 2017, the Qatar crisis happened, so Qatar went out of the coalition and effectively started to find ways to amend and find ways how it can basically provoke Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But the United Arab Emirates also, from its side, started to support separatists factions in the south of Yemen, and basically the country hasn't been able to get back on track since then. The most important part is that the solutions that came in between, I think, despite one genuine attempt in 2016 during the Kuwait talks, the other talks were basically very short-sighted. They tried to solve a solution for a specific matter rather than providing a more inclusive solution, and hence that's why, in my opinion, the Stockholm agreements could not achieve any kind of success. The whole feature of the Stockholm agreement that we're going to agree on finding a solution for a redeployment of forces into just one specific city. Mm-hmm. So what happened is that the fighting cooled down in that specific city in Hodeidah on the west coast, but it spiraled viral and started to escalate in other parts of the country. So factions started to say, now maybe I can make gains in other parts, and the situation, as more we go, it's becoming more unstable. The other important, I think, also factor into this is that in August last year, the United Arab Emirates fell short with the official Yemeni government that was supposed the coalition came into backing, when the faction it supported fought the Yemeni government forces inside the temporary interim capital of Aden, south of Yemen. So in effect, you have the main conflict, which is basically, at least on paper, we have the Yemeni government against the Houthis. The Yemeni government is supposed to be supported by the coalition, and the Houthis are receiving funding and support by Iran. But also within, you have a conflict within a conflict, which is the factions that are not happy with the current, let's say, with the current dynamic of the conflict, or you have factions directly receiving funding and support from countries like the United Arab Emirates, who effectively have managed to stop any kind of state government institutions from operating in areas where the Houthis have lost control. So basically, creating I would say a more complicated, unstable situation.
So what is the strategy? Like, what are these two countries that are backing? What is their strategy? What are they aiming to achieve?
Well, there are a lot of questions about what do they trying to achieve. At least officially, the Saudi Arabia saying it wants to support the Yemeni government to get back into power and reinitiate the deal it brokered in 2011, and then eventually the move forward with the transition. According to the plan that was agreed between the Yemenis and with the consensus of the international community. But the situation on the ground, of course, is a little bit more complicated than simply that. What does the United Arab Emirates? I think for now it's clear. The Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates don't see eye to eye on what's happening on the situation on the ground. Saudi Arabia's main concern is clearly that it doesn't want to see another country, especially like Yemen, because it shares a huge borderline with Yemen, to fall into the Iranian prism. But from the UAE side, started to support factions that in the south of Yemen they call for secessionists, but also in other parts of the country they support factions that don't answer or respond to the official Yemeni government. And that's the kind of the situation as it is right now. It's a lot more complicated than is it an easy solution? I think there is no just easy solutions into the conflict, but definitely I think the situation since 2018 started to get more and more complicated as United Arab Emirates started to fund a lot of armed groups who creating basically instability and fighting in areas that are far away from the conflict.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the arms sales to both the warring parties from Western countries. Let's talk about the culpability of Western countries. Your work has particularly centered around drones. There has been, there's talk of war crimes. In September, a UN group of eminent experts on Yemen stated that the parties to the conflict in Yemen are responsible for an array of human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law. Some of these violations are likely to amount to war crimes. And today we know that the United Nations is discussing Yemen in the Security Council. Our colleague was just on a call this morning, and so that was being discussed. So I'd like to get your comment on that.
I think so. The first thing is I am yes, I agree. I'm definitely sure that all part conflict have committed violations to the international humanitarian law. I think I'll leave it to the experts of whether how would they assess it. Are they war crimes or no? But definitely there are massive violations have been committed by all parties, no exception. The question about the arms sales and kind of the work of the counterterrorism measures that are in place that have been in place for a long time in Yemen. I think in a way it shows how the international community or the world sees Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
No one understands the situation in Yemen as the Yemenis sees it for themselves. No one understands that actually there is a nation and a public who basically have been struggling for quite a long time, that they want a civil, democratic state, and they want a peaceful transition, and they just want state institutions to operate as normal. Delivering services and serving the society. The way how the international community saw Yemen was first through the counterterrorism measure, and that's for me was one of the problems, because the entire policy was just focused on this country is a potential threat. Although a couple of years into the conflict, we've seen the real amount of threats coming from the most deaths today are not caused because of the how much of Al-Qaeda is actually operating in the country. This is still very much debatable, but it occupies a lot of space at the international level. When, let's say, when Yemen fell into conflict officially in 2015, the first instigator, people like the world didn't say, "Oh, what's going to happen to the Yemeni people?" Rather, what's going to happen now with Al-Qaeda? And that's actually that shifts a lot of, because it means your policy is not focused, on what the people have been trying to and struggling to achieve, but rather, feeling that this is just a security threat. Once I shut down that security threat, all the problems are just gone. The second thing, which is quite also for me also a problem, is that the arms sales, because you cannot find anything that is linked to the international community, is not linked to Western governments. Then we found, okay, Western governments are selling arms to Saudi Arabia, and that's a small thing into the whole picture. So there's no investment into seeing the wider picture, and therefore investing in more sustainable solution that can achieve more, achieve peace across Yemen. But rather than the campaign focused on, let's just prevent sales going into Saudi Arabia, and then magically the whole problem will disappear. Well, in fact, actually the will continue. So unless our shift is focused into, there needs to be investment into two main factors that can achieve peace: a more sustainable political solution that is inclusive of all parties and political parties, factions, youth, women, and civil society, not just the people, and the factions who have arms or boots on the ground. And the second is having a prosperous economy, investing in an economy that can lead to the Yemeni people. And so even when, we talk about the humanitarian aid, it shifts a lot when your policy is just, shall we just deliver aid, or shall we find a more sustainable solution that we can find? Even when the entire world today is facing a pandemic, you need to invest into the infrastructure, that's the health sector, rather than just thinking we're just going to send a couple of rations of food and just put a lid into on the problem and think will magically disappear. So investments on long-term solutions that are more strategic and focused has been missing when it comes to Yemen. There was a short period, as I mentioned before, when it was after 2011, when the international community showed some interest, a little bit of interest into what's happening in Yemen, but it soon faded away the moment into when the country fell into conflict. When in fact it was when actually the situation falls into conflict, that's when the people need you, because everyone is going to try to claim success when things are going smoothly and things are moving forward and elections are gonna happen. If each country and state wants to claim that success for itself, but no one wants to take responsibility or try to say maybe we want to step in right now before the situation deteriorates even further.
So someone who's from there, born, raised there, knows the society. What are things that the elements of society that you believe are sparks of hope, that you believe that these can be built around for that peace movement, for peace to come back to Yemen?
Well, I think one of the first thing is that many people don't realize this, but you have an active and vibrant civil society in Yemen that is still working and operating despite the challenges that they are facing. And that's, I think, a lot of people don't understand. The other thing is that the Yemeni, let's say, if you'd like to say, the younger generation are quite coming from a background that actually they're used to speak and debate and talk about and talk about their future. It's not just simply they're gonna just wait and be silenced, and that's why one of the reasons that especially the civil society is still operating, because it's still connected with each other. They're not used to being just silent and not working. A second sign of hope, I think, is if you go to at the local level, there are pockets of to be able to achieve something even in the midst of the conflict. So you have provinces that are working and operating and able to deliver even in this difficult scenario. For me, it's a sign that once there is a place where people find it's safe, that's when things starts moving together. And I can name you a couple of provinces that are working, and people are new businesses are open, making some progress despite the many challenges and all of the grim news that comes out of Yemen. The main, I think, challenge is that because of the de facto authority that has been created in Sana'a by the Houthis, they have expelled all of the political factions, all of the other political factions. So no one is able to claim that they are in the capital. So unless there is a solution that is inclusive again of all factions, and you have the capital, all of the country can return back to and work from within. I'm afraid the conflict is still gonna last a little bit longer.
At this point, I'd like to bring in our next guest, Jehan Hakim. Jehan is from the Yemen Alliance Committee. She is an activist based in the Bay Area. She's the founder and chairperson of the Yemeni Alliance Committee and a board member of Just Foreign Policy. She's a community organizer, a youth counselor, and an interfaith panelist. Thank you so much, Jehan, for being here and for talking about the work of the Yemeni Alliance Committee that is towards the stability and safety of the people of Yemen. Okay.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here. And so I wanted to talk about, like, that is a lot of times, like Baraa was mentioning, the people of Yemen are taken out of the equation, and it's often a conflict, and it's often like the terms and even the policies that are made are devoid of any real investment in the people of Yemen. So I would like for you to start a little bit of tell us about what the work that you all are doing, and what is the Yemeni the Yemeni Alliance Committee?
I know it's a mouthful. The Yemeni Alliance Committee was formed after the first Muslim ban in 2017. We organize protests and actions. We coordinate congressional visits. We create language for social media toolkits and campaigns to resist anti-Yemeni policies. Mm-hmm. Our focus recently has been advocating to end U.S. support to the Saudi-led coalition's aggression in Yemen, and we do that by raising awareness and pushing legislation. I'm the founder, but I also have a team, and we're all Yemeni American. We're also volunteers. Mm-hmm. We have day jobs. What our hope is through our advocacy and organizing is to equip our communities and our allies with tools to challenge harmful national security policies that impact Yemeni Americans and their families here and their homeland. Specifically around the war in Yemen, we have worked with lawmakers such as Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, to push war powers resolutions that unfortunately have been vetoed, even though they passed through both chambers. And just really quickly, what a war powers resolution is a piece of legislation that was passed during the Vietnam War era, and it would direct the president to remove U.S. forces from unauthorized hostilities. And the resolution with respect to the war in Yemen would have called out the U.S. From supporting the coalition with targeting assistance and selling arms to the kingdom. So whether it's Trump or whomever is next, whoever wins the election, that war powers resolution we feel will be a significant push in some of our advocacy work.
Okay, so this is so aside from the advocacy work, and this is great to know about, because I would love to cooperate, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more about how Justice for All can amplify some of your work. Is there any humanitarian aspect of this, or this is a pure advocacy organization?
Yes, we are purely advocacy focused, but we do support Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, which is a humanitarian aid agency based in the U.S., but it's also volunteer-led here and back home, and it is the only organization that you will see us constantly pushing and sending our followers to go donate to.
Okay. So I really wanted to talk to both of you about the effect of this war, this conflict. Should we call it a war? A lot of times, those are also words that are used. Like, should we call this a war? And what has the effects been on the women and children of Yemen? Because a lot of times, those voices are not centered.
Well, we can call it a war. We can call it, as the UN says, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Or we can also call it, according to Genocide Watch, it has levels of how it measures war or disasters. And Yemen currently is at level 9, which is extermination. So it's definitely disastrous. But with respect to women and children, as with all crises, women and children are the most vulnerable. And just to share some statistics, 4.5 million children and pregnant or lactating women are acutely malnourished. So if a pregnant woman is not able to sustain herself, she cannot sustain her child, and therefore she cannot even breastfeed her child, which starts the child off at a very, very delayed and behind. The children of Yemen have suffered the most as a result of the conflict to date. An estimated 12.3 million children are currently in need of humanitarian assistance, all of whom face serious risks to their safety, well-being, in particular death or maiming as a result of armed exchanges. Save the Children estimated that 85,000 children under the age of 5 have died from starvation. It's kind of heavy for me to share these numbers because I myself am a mother, and 85,000 children is immense, and that number is only increasing. According to the UN, the reports have shown that every 10 minutes a child dies in Yemen due to disease or hunger. And that's not counting the number of children who are out of school, children born into the war, and the amount of trauma that will be the aftermath for many years to come, even after the war ends.
What efforts are you seeing, Baraa, to mitigate any of that? And like you talked a little bit about investment in healthcare sector, what would you like to see more done? Like some basic, practical things that perhaps people in the United States who are concerned can do, aside from sending donations for food rations, as you were talking. What are something else that you would suggest for activists here, for philanthropists here?
Well, I think first answering your question is I think you need to think of the organizations that are providing more kind of strategic and on the ground and have a good outreach to people on the ground. I definitely recommend what Jahan mentioned. Yemen Relief is one of the known and good organizations that have quite a good reputation, especially amongst beneficiaries. And you have other organizations like MSF, I would say. What I would say is, for example, in the current climate, one of the desperate needs that the Yemeni hospitals need is ventilators. So instead of thinking of we're just sending aid and we don't know where that's gonna end up, is like if you have rather at maybe at a community level in the US or here in the UK, who can think of being like maybe a group can come together and say, we can maybe come up with the price of a ventilator and then make sure that it reaches to hospitals inside Yemen. And if people don't know, I can give you the number. For example, currently there are almost 500 ventilators serving a population of over 30 million, and that's one example. And another topic, and I would like to go back to your question about women and children very quickly. One of, for example, the hidden consequences of this conflict is you have massive number of children who are being recruited into the fighting. Associated Press just last year published a report that showed that at least 18,000 children have been recruited by the Houthis in the north. And when you think of it, I remember when I first went to the northern parts of Yemen when the war was still at the beginning at the regions of Sada, that's up north of the country, and I remember meeting those children when they were very young, and trying to understand for them what are their reasons behind fighting. And imagine if you have a child who back then, I think, remember, they were 12. Now 10 years of experience is just war. That basically becomes the normality then for them. And I think that's what people should start thinking a little bit ahead. 5 years we were into the conflict. What would happen after 3 or 4 years? You have an entire generation, 9 years, of a child who would be maybe 10, Now he would, after a couple of years, he would be 15 or 19 in 4 years. That's all what he experienced in life. So it becomes an easy thing to be recruited by any of the armed groups, and that's basically because that's their only alternative, and you don't have forms of dissent inside it, so people will not be even able to say no. So either it's their main source of income, or by force they will not be able to resist us. And I think these kind of small things that people don't see, but will definitely affect the society on a long term level, is what people should think of. And I still remember, like, those Houthi fighters I met. Where are they now? That's what I keep thinking, like, on a daily level. Today they're 22 years, and they're definitely still fighting with the Houthis, because that's all what they've known, and because their areas have been deprived from any forms of development for a long time. Not justifying the issue of nothing justifies recruitment, but we need to find, think of what would happen next, and where is, how can we invest in a way that ensures that the future could be could also be protected.
A point that you brought up that is COVID in Yemen yet? Has it started spreading? What can you guys give me some updates on that, Jahan?
Well, the first COVID case was confirmed on April 19th in Hadramaut, and it was a 60-year-old port worker. And since then, Yemen has approximately 10 to 12 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and around 2 deaths. But beyond COVID, I think that a lot of the dynamics that have existed before COVID have kind of been either neglected or minimized. Is that Yemen has had at least 4 major cholera outbreaks. And diphtheria and dengue fever are also ongoing concerns. And the most silent killer of all, outside of the violence, the airstrikes, and disease, has been hunger, where over 85,000 children have starved to death, like I said earlier. So it's, with a crippled infrastructure, lack of access to clean water, and an inadequate sanitation, the looming threat of COVID is so concerning for so many of us who have families still back home.
It's all of this is very heavy. It's heavy to talk about it. It's heavy, especially for the two of you that are from there. So, please, I want to take just 1 second just to acknowledge that. Thank you for talking about it, because I work with a lot of impacted communities, and it's hard on people's hearts. It's hard on to speak about it, whether it's Rohingya or Uyghurs or Yemenis or Syrians, Palestinians, but the need for your voices is so powerful and so strong. And just so thank you for the rest. I mean, sometimes we forget to acknowledge that, and I wanted to take a minute to just acknowledge that from both of you. For a lot of times, we just look at figures, and each figure is a person, each figure is a human being with a life and dreams and aspirations, and those were somebody's babies. So yes, this is, I really, a lot of times when and we've been on the Hill with Stand, which is Stand Against Genocide, or Coping, advocating for Yemen, and it just seems like the world's reaction to Yemen is very different from its reaction to other crises. And it would be good to hear from both of you on your perspectives on that. Either one of you.
Yeah,
Sure.
Jahan, go
Okay.
first.
Okay. Thank you so much for your kind words, Hina. I think that's something that, as organizers, we're always working on campaigns. And because we're not always connected to them, it's easy. The work is somewhat easy. I know we can go and do lobbying and everything and do the outreach work, but this is so close to home that it's really emotionally draining. And just really quickly, if we're on WhatsApp when we communicate with our families, and if I don't hear back from my family, I just get immense anxiety. So thank you for just humanizing that point. With respect to how the world has viewed this crisis, it's been called the silent war or the forgotten war. Much of the media and politicians have either glossed over Yemen or minimize the damage. I think it's with respect to like the American perspective, I think it's mainly due to the fact that the US is supporting and backing their allies, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates.
Mm-hmm.
And refuting this by lobbying or raising awareness or what have you would not only check the overreach of the president to declare war, as we know, only Congress has the power to authorize war.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just quickly remind folks that, because people think that this is a Trump war, the U.S. supported the coalition's intervention into Yemen in 2015 under the Obama administration.
Exactly. That's how Baraa and I met.
Really?
Yes, that's exactly how we met. Yes.
SubhanAllah. I think also refuting these actions chips away at the AUMF. And just briefly for listeners, the AUMF was hastily drafted after 9/11 to authorize the use of force against perpetrators of those attacks after 9/11. And AUMF stands for the Authorization Use of Military Force. What this broad language has done is it has justified many endless wars, not only in Yemen. It's also known as the War on Terror, and it has made legal the use of drone strikes into Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, the justification of Guantanamo Bay, the torture, the forced feeding, which remains open until today. Another effect from the War on Terror is NSEERS, which is the old Muslim registry that Obama rescinded right before he left his office. With respect to AUMF, if you guys want to follow, Representative Barbara Lee has been leading its repeal. But I think when the wave shifted in the favor, if you will, of the world's worst humanitarian crisis, the war in Yemen, is after the brutal murder of Khashoggi in 2018. I think that gave the international community a different perspective into the capabilities of the kingdom. It also forced the world to pay attention to what's happening in Yemen at the hands of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, since before that time, the focus was mostly on Iran's role in Yemen. So we have leveraged that moment ever since to really raise awareness and call on lawmakers and in collaboration with different anti-war organizers to lobby and just start different campaigns to not only raise awareness, but also try to pass legislation to cut off what the U.S. has been doing in support of this war.
And it's a slow process, right? But you have had some wins. You've had Ro Khanna come out very strong, and this is partly because of the fact that you're based in California, and California's lawmakers tend to be a little bit more progressive on these issues. But it is also investment, and just his leadership as well. We're really proud of him for a number of on his work in a number of issues, and so. Where can our readership or our audience find out more about how to get involved with advocacy here, and what else can be done, especially under advocacy under under COVID? It hasn't ended. I know ours hasn't, and I'm sure yours hasn't either. So talk about that, and then Baraa, I'm going to come back to you about the world's reaction to this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that can be done, quite a bit. Just quickly to remind folks that the U.S. is the largest arms sales exporter while Saudi Arabia is the largest arms sales consumer. To date, the U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia has been over $100 billion. We shouldn't have U.S. dollars entangled in the support of war crimes. And then on the contrast, while humanitarian aid to fight COVID has been around $1 million because there have been cuts. And Yemen is also still on the list of banned countries. So Yemen is being bombed, starved, and banned. And so what folks can do, back to your question, while we're in quarantine from home, folks can use their social media platforms to raise awareness, use the hashtag that folks here and back home have been using, which is hashtag Yemen can't wait. And that can't be closer to the truth. It literally cannot wait. Now we're going into 5-6 years of this war, and the number of casualties just continue to increase. And like I said earlier, Yemen is on the brink of not only a famine, but also extermination. So what folks can do, because I know advocacy can be a little bit overwhelming. I would suggest to follow folks like me, Shireen Al-Ademi, other organizations that I can share with you to share with your followers. But folks can call their lawmakers. I know they're in recess right now, but you can leave them voice messages. You can email them, tweet at them, urge them to end support to the Saudi-led coalition who's been bombing and blockading Yemen for over five years. Also to cut arms sales. So we have a lot of power in social media, and we can reach how many things go viral every day, and they tend to be insignificant sometimes. We're talking about lives of over 28, 29, 30 million people. And lastly, there are 2 humanitarian agencies that recently suspended aid into Yemen. The World Food Program and USAID both decided to cut aid into Yemen on the same day that COVID was announced in Yemen. So with COVID, the blockade, on the ground fighting, airstrikes, famine, disease, not to mention it's also Ramadan, Yemen needs more aid, not cuts and bombs. So I would definitely recommend for folks to follow us, because we have the talking points that you can use. You can just reshare, retweet. And then once we get out of this stage of quarantine ourselves here in the States, I would strongly urge constituents to visit their lawmakers, schedule a meeting. We have more power than we realize. Our elected officials are there because we elected them. We gave them the power that they have. So it is our duty to hold them accountable to all the promises that they made during that campaign. Not only do folks contribute to campaigns, but they also they also supported them also morally. So we have an obligation to hold their feet to the fire in where they decide to, who they decide to fund, what they decide to back. And when it comes to the war in Yemen, like you said, we did have a win with the War Powers Resolution, which passed through both chambers. It was bipartisan, so both sides voted for it, but still Trump vetoed it. What should have happened next was lawmakers should have sued Trump over that, because it was an overreach on his part as a president. So all these things are things that people can do from home now, and then afterwards, some different tips that people can do to also join into the anti-war effort. And this can be also integrated into a lot of the other issues that are going on in the world. Afghanistan, I mean, how long has that war been in place? So it's not just an argument against the war in Yemen. It's against all wars, to end endless wars.
Are there any efforts for divestment from church groups, from these large corporations, for example, Amana, like Muslim organizations who are, financial groups into that have ties with arms sales? Like, is there any activity on that end, or is that something in the horizon?
We have tried very little to start a BDS campaign for Yemen, and it's, like you said, very slow.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know of any organizations that do have shares with these arms companies, but we have had a lot of reluctance from Muslim organizations to support this effort, quite honestly.
So maybe that's something that we could possibly talk about, because a lot of times it's the same people who are selling, same companies that are selling to kill Rohingyas, to kill the same surveillance companies that are working in East Turkestan. You know, like a lot of times, and I feel like a lot of times the oppressors are more organized and in contact with each other than those of us who are working on the ground. So yes, we do have some questions as well. And before I move on to you, Baraa, do you think there has been enough pressure on Saudi Arabia to stop the war in Yemen?
Is that for me or?
Either one of you can take that question. And there's there's one, and then because just to keep an eye on, we have about 10 minutes. There is another question that talks about the reports of, I'm not sure which exact reports they're talking about, but she says she has family in Taiz that claims that those attacks are rumors. And so not sure, Sister Kother, if you're listening, if you could send us a little bit more information on which reports you were exactly talking about, so we can have that question answered. That'd be great. And then, so if we could go back to Saudi Arabia, and if has Saudi finally stopped its campaign in Yemen is one of the questions. So, Baraa, if you want to take that.
Well, I think it's well, of course not, and I don't think it's an easy answer, simply because unfortunately Yemen fell into this let's say regional dispute. Although one of the key ways when we wanted to have the transition between 2011 until 2014 was to prevent Yemen being dragged into this dispute between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And as a matter of fact, when you have more countries involved, the situation is going to be more complicated, and a political resolution becomes harder. Only when they start losing interest into the conflict, then it allows path for the Yemeni factions to step in and fill the vacuum. And I wouldn't downplay the role of Iran, as more reports coming in. Just in January this year, the United Nations panel of experts reported their findings about the massive amount of weaponry and smuggling going to the Houthi hands. There's been diversion of humanitarian aid, actually benefiting from humanitarian aid to recruit more fighters. So it is actually have been a challenge. And just at the beginning of this month, we're in the month of Ramadan, we have 4 journalists, facing a death sentence in a Houthi court in Sana'a, and all forms of dissent or any form of expression has been banned inside Sana'a. And for me, that's very worrying, because even through the period when we were, protesting in the square in 2011, the years that followed, we felt that we've achieved something, that things were moving more progressively and things were moving. But unfortunately, things seems to be moving to the other direction, and that's not to shift the blame just on one side, on the Houthis. Also, if you see what the UAE have been doing in the south of Yemen, they've crushed political dissent, took a lot of politicians, activists, human rights workers into prison. And I think this kind of form is what is missing for me into the Yemen debate, because it's not just simply about this, because it's easy if you find some politician who doesn't like Saudi Arabia, then you're going to drag him and voice his criticism on Saudi Arabia, and then if you find another one who's against Iran. The hardest part is that when we found people, who can help voices from within the country. For example, those 4 journalists who are now facing death penalty inside Sana'a, and I think this has been constantly the challenge, is trying to find the activists and civil society from within the country, and then help them project and make their voices reach a wider audience, not just their surroundings or just their constituents.
So how does that happen? How does that happen? How would that? Would I get in touch with somebody and put them on here and you translate for them? I mean, what can we do? Right? Like sometimes
I think that's a brilliant idea. Like that's one example. Like for example, we can for example host the lawyer or the activist who are defending those journalists. I can hook you, with the lawyer who has helped to reveal the presence of the UAE secret prisons in the south of Yemen. These kind of on the ground form of activism that actually deal with the challenges on a day-to-day basis is what I think is just missing from all of this. Because at the end of the day, yes, humanitarian aid is important. Yes, there is a disaster, but at the end of the day, it's on the Yemenis to finally come in and provide solutions. No country, there hasn't been any state that have survived on humanitarian aid. For me, I'm waiting for the day to return back to the country. Once to rebuild the institutions. We'd like to see institutions that are able to serve and provide services for the people.
Yeah, no, very, very important point, because sometimes because in our efforts to, and it's a very fine line too, so in our efforts to uplift voices, sometimes we crush those very voices that we're trying to help and to get their buy-in and to make sure that any steps that we're taking, any advocacy that we're doing is also informed by their consent and with their guidance, because they're the ones at the end of the day who have to live through it. I think the question that the sister was asking, Kausar was asking, was about COVID cases in Tiaz. She says that she has heard otherwise. So if you can confirm those reports, or can you speak to the credibility of those reports?
I mean, maybe Jahan can comment, but yeah, I think we can confirm there has been reported cases of COVID-19 in Taz, and unfortunately, like anything at the beginning, the authorities at the beginning tried to say, no, it's not COVID, it's something, it's something else. But unfortunately, this is not a pandemic that you can just control by suppressing information or controlling information, because once it spells, it's then going to be hard to control. But yeah, today I was reading, and people have reported some cases from within Taiz in central Yemen. And again, for people who don't understand, Taiz is still living under siege since the Houthis laid siege on it in 2015. It's been 5 years, constantly living effectively under a siege.
But Jahan, so if you would like to say some, ending words to our audience, and thank you so much for being here, both of you. It was, we need more of these dialogues within different groups, and really need to also reform. I don't know if there's a worldwide group of Yemeni activists. Is there? Because a lot of times the work is being done in silos, and there's not enough talk between. So from, I've been doing this work for a while, and this is one recommendation I always make to people, even if people disagree with each other, even if they're on different ends of the political spectrum, they need to come together at times like this, because the crisis is so big that only one, working in silos is, you have to get organized. And oftentimes we're organizing people on the ground when we need to be organized, and we need to be in contact and communication, and making sure that those that it's efforts are not replicated but amplified of each other. And so yes, I could go on for that, but go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to briefly go back quickly to when you asked about the Saudi Arabia and the attention that it's getting, or anyone challenging it. Like Baraa mentioned, that it's the war in Yemen is super multifaceted, it's complicated. But with respect to Saudi Arabia's role, and like you said, Hannah, you lobby, you go to the Hill. Saudi lobbyists pay in cash, and none of us can even come close. Like I said, we're all volunteers. So there's a large amount of financial investments that the U.S. has with Saudi Arabia and the coalition. So it's not an easy fix and to just say, hey, Saudi Arabia, you need to quit this, because then the U.S. is going to also be held accountable. And then the Muslim community has this kind of outlook on Saudi Arabia being the holder of the most holy land, according to Muslims. So that's another piece why, calling out Saudi Arabia from the Muslim community hasn't really been heard. I recently wrote an article about that. Like, it's very, very few support that we get from folks calling out Saudi Arabia. And I use this as a disclaimer to remind folks that we are ourselves nonpartisan, the Yemeni Alliance Committee. We don't support any side, but as Americans, our focus has been to call out our government's role in this war.
Baraa, if you would like to, before we say goodbye, just a few last words.
Yeah, I mean, I think just what I can say, what I would like to, in this, especially during these difficult times, is try to think of when you provide aid, of being more strategic and focused. And then again, one way to do this is to think of again, we can provide it, but also there are many organizations who can provide this information. Find what are the main hospitals that are in need right now in the country, and what they need is they need ventilators. That's a clear example of what you can what you can do. Never stop educating yourself and listening to people from the ground. Eventually, it's the people on the ground who can eventually make change and make things differently. What we're trying to do is to help their voices just reach a larger audience, rather than making them just posters or numbers or just figures.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for this very informative but also a clear dialogue. I am, the point that Baraa just made, this is something that we push all the time, even within the Muslim community. We have to, yes, relief is important. Yes, relief work is important, but this is short-term Band-Aid solutions. We need to divide our donations this Ramadan between just, and expand it between the masjid and the relief, but we have to invest in many other dimensions that can actually bring about long-term change and not just short-term change. So investment in the people of Yemen, in their education, to get them off, strengthening civil society, as well as when you strengthen civil society, you can strengthen politics. And this can be applied to us here in the United States as well. You need to invest in advocacy organizations. You need to, like the Yemeni Alliance Committee organizations. This is what brings a long-term change. It's easy to send a $10 blanket, and then for the Muslim community to think that their role is over, that their work is done, that they have now done their Ramadan sadaqah, they have sent. Yes, it's important to fulfill the short-term needs of human beings, and there's much reward for that. But with that, long-term needs have to be looked at by this very same community. We are a strong community. We are powerful within ourselves, because we know that and a lot of times our efforts are so distributed because we've been punched from so many different directions. But Yemen is a cause that is it should hold heavy in our hearts every day. So this Ramadan, I urge you all to contribute to this work. As Baraa was saying, someone take this idea of take ventilators and supplying them directly to hospitals in Yemen. Take this and run with it. Support the advocacy of the Yemen Alliance Committee. Support this work. This is incumbent on both you and me. So thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Justice for All Now, and we'll keep doing this until we see a change. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.